Hi again, everyone. Scott Pirate Popcorn Fan here, and in this video, this past week and a half, I've been watching Lord of the Rings: Rings of Power. I just finished watching it last night, season 2. And I was watching the first season as well, and I do think that season 2 has a better, more cohesive, focused story from episode to episode, and I liked the more consistent story as the episodes progressed this season compared to the first season. And something I have to applaud this show for is how it's starting to help me be more familiar with this world. And I've seen the movies. I didn't necessarily grow up with the Lord of the Rings films, but I've seen them. I've seen all of the movies, even the Hobbit films, and I never read the books, so I don't know the original source material that these movies and the show is based on. But I really appreciate that this show is kind of chronicling of certain events from thousands of years before these Hobbit and Lord of the Rings stories, and how eventually things are happening in the show will eventually become what we know of in the Peter Jackson movies. And there's something to be said about that. It's opening my mind to the rich lore and history of Middle Earth, and that's what I really like about this show. It's doing that for me, and especially with certain characters and certain species. There's even like new creatures this season that I don't think are in the books. I'm not sure, but I know another thing. I don't know the books, but I've heard that this show is changing a few things from the books. So if I'm not familiar with something, other people that have read the books may not be familiar with something either that they're introducing in this show. So there's that as well. And I really like what they've done with the season 1 ending, and how the main villain of season 2 is a character that I'm sure it's not a spoiler. Sauron, he's the main villain of the season, because they teased him as a main villain in the trailers, so that's not a spoiler. And I like the actor. Charlie Vickers. I don't know him necessarily as an actor, but I really like his portrayal of Sauron. I think it's interesting because in the first season, he was Halbrand, right? He was in human form, and we didn't really get a whole lot of backstory with that character until this season. We get flashbacks of what happened to him, and with between him and Adar, and I thought that was really fascinating. I like how we're getting a little bit more backstory to the Sauron character and how he relates to the Morgoth, Emperor Palpatine of this franchise, essentially. Like Morgoth, this I think he's like he's a god, right? He's like some sort of deity, and he's essentially like the Emperor Palpatine of this franchise, and Sauron is like the Darth Vader of this franchise. So it's interesting, and that's something I was really fascinated by. It was easily the story arc that I was the most invested in, because I thought he was such a cunning and devious villain that was pulling the strings and trying to lay the foundation of the creation of more Rings of Power. And I thought that was very fascinating. And I hope I don't butcher this character's name, but Lord Celebrimbor, I believe that's his name, and how you pronounce it, Celebrimbor. I felt so bad for him as the season went on, because Sauron was deceiving him, tricking him, making him do what Sauron needs and wants him to do. And I just felt so bad for that character. I really did, as the season went on. And in that in the last few episodes, the actor that plays Lord Celebrimbor, he really gives it his all in the last couple episodes, and I feel so bad for him because of Sauron deceiving him so much. Oh my goodness. And amongst all the other actors, the other story and characters that I was most invested in were the Durins. Everything was going on with the dwarves, and how the Durin the Fourth, being this older dwarf that started to not listen to his son very much, and how it started, this new ring he got started to corrupt his mind, and that wasn't something that I felt bad for his son during the third, or sorry, during the third was the dad, during the fourth was the son, and I felt bad for Durin, and because his dad was just not listening to him and being very rude to him, and I liked that story as well, the story with the dwarves, and also the one that I'm sure everyone was the most intrigued by. I sure was, the story between Nori and Poppy and the wizard character that we've been following since season 1. I think that story, while in the second half of the season, in this season, it very much reminded me of Empire Strikes Back. There's elements of the wizard story that reminded me of Luke's story in Empire Strikes Back. There's some thematic similarities there in the story with the wizard that we're following, and I really liked that because I wasn't sure where they were going to take that character, and I was surprised by his true identity in the finale. I'm not gonna spoil that, but I was surprised and I was satisfied because he really does look like a younger version of a character from the movies. I'm not gonna say anything else about that, but I'm satisfied. I think he can pull that character off. I think the actor playing him, he looks the part. He looks like a younger version of that character. And there's another wizard that is essentially like a I guess his villain in a way. I wonder if he'll be Saruman from the movies. They haven't revealed him as Saruman, but he could be. I'm really curious about that. So yeah, and also another thing that this show is doing is chronicling the fall of Numenor and the whole thing going on with the humans, the men and women. Really curious about how that story is going to go. I mean, we all know that because it's chronicling the fall of Numenor, I'm sure that by the end of the show, it will fall, right? Humanity and that society there will fall by the end of the show. And there are a few characters within that I don't care for. There are a few characters. There's this one character especially that he's just a complete. He has a punchable face. I'll just say that. I don't care for him. So there are a few characters within the human story that I don't care for, but I'm really curious how that story is going to go going forward, because we know where that's going to go. We know where that's going to go, and. Also, in regards to the Harfoots and the other species of hobbits that we're getting in this show, I see what they're doing, because if it's true that these hobbit species that we're seeing in this show are ancestors to hobbits in the stories later in the timeline, I'm hoping that by the end of this show we'll see these species of hobbits eventually migrate and find the location where the Shire is in the movies and build the Shire. I'm assuming that's where that's going to go by the end of the show. So I'm really curious about that story there as well. I think it's very fascinating, even though we also know where that's going to go. And yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this season. There are a few things that I have nitpicks for, like there's a few characters from the human story I don't care for. And also, I need to talk about the character of Adar as well, because I think he's a very interesting villain. Adar, him being like the first orc or Uruk, and how he was like the father of the orcs. That story there also I was interested in because I could see how he felt for the orcs because he saw them as his children, and I thought he was a very interesting villain as a result of that. I was really interested in that story and where that was going, and Sauron got his revenge on him in the finale. That's all I'm gonna say about that. But I really I felt for him in the last few episodes. Adar as a villain, I thought he was interesting. I thought he was terrifying in certain senses, especially in the first season, and I think he was one of the better villains on this show until what happened in the finale this season, and it's just so fascinating, I think this show has the potential to get even better as it goes on, and I think this season was definitely better than the first season. I was a lot more invested because these characters were more fleshed out. And another character I'm curious about is the character of Arondir, the elf that is, African American. I'm really curious if he's like an ancestor to Legolas. He might be. Like, I'm wondering if he's part of Legolas's bloodline. Orlando Bloom's character in the movies. I'm wondering about that. Because he sort of reminds me of Legolas a little bit. So I'm really curious about that character and where his story is going to go going forward. So, yeah. It's a lot to talk about, I know, because it's a TV show, there's more to talk about with a show like this. And I'm just really enjoying Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. I think after this I'm going to rewatch the movies too, so that's something that's going to keep me busy for a while because those movies are long as hell. But yeah, so if I had to give Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power Season 2 a grade, I would definitely give it, I'd say a B+. I think that'd be my grade for this season overall. I can't remember what grade I gave the first season, but I maybe closer to an A- for me for this season, actually. A-, yeah. So, yeah, that's my grade for Rings of Power Season 2. It's definitely worth it if you're a Lord of the Rings fan. Definitely. So, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.